In this video, we're uncovering an Everest event in which a seasoned climber moved beyond the point of survival while existing safeguards remained inactive. What happened above 26,000 feet reveals how preparation alone cannot prevent collapse when no one interrupts a decisive moment. It was May 18th, 2016, on the upper Lhotse face of Mount Everest, Nepal. By mid-morning, Tomasz Koren, a climber who had already moved beyond the body's ability to recover, was preparing to leave the fixed-line system that governed every safe movement on the mountain. What followed did not begin with panic or visible failure. It began with a calm, deliberate transition away from a structure designed to keep people alive in a place where survival winds exceeded safe limits. Visibility dropped. Any further attempt to descend the Lhotse face was ruled as technician from Gdansk, Poland. His professional life revolved around suspended work at height. He maintained offshore wind turbines and high-rise structures, often operating hundreds of feet above ground or open water. His job required precise equipment checks, disciplined movement, and trust in systems that functioned only when used exactly as designed. Colleagues described him as methodical and quiet, someone who followed procedures without improvisation. Koren did not approach Everest as a symbolic challenge or a personal conquest. He viewed it as a logistical problem to be managed through preparation and efficiency. He joined a mid-tier commercial expedition, not for recognition, but for access to infrastructure, guides, fixed lines, weather forecasting, and oxygen logistics offered predictability. He was not attempting to redefine climbing style or establish a record. He intended to operate within a system and believed that careful planning could reduce exposure to the mountain's most damaging variables. His motivation was practical. Prolonged time above 26,000 feet degrades physical function and judgment. Faster transitions reduce oxygen consumption, limit cold exposure, and decrease cumulative fatigue. Koren had spent years minimizing time at risk in industrial settings. He believed the same logic could be applied on Everest, where delays often cause more harm than movement. This reasoning was not unusual among experienced climbers. It was commonly discussed, rarely challenged, and usually applied only within the boundaries of established descent methods. Koren was aware of these risks in abstract terms. He had studied the route. He had watched footage of previous seasons. He understood that the face was unforgiving. What he believed, based on his professional background, was that controlled execution could prevent the loss of control entirely. This belief did not arise from arrogance or recklessness. It arose from years of operating in environments where skill and preparation reliably compensated for exposure. In industrial rope access work, Koren had learned to treat exposure as a variable that could be reduced through execution. Tasks were planned backward from their most dangerous moments. Equipment was configured to minimize time suspended. Movement was deliberate and continuous because stopping often introduced more risk than proceeding. Over years of work, this approach produced consistent outcomes. Precision worked. Systems held. Mistakes were avoided, not by hesitation, but by clean, uninterrupted motion, carried through exactly as rehearsed. Snowboards rely on edge engagement and surface compression to regulate speed. On hard glacial ice, edges skate rather than bite. Once the edge loses purchase, acceleration occurs faster than muscular correction is possible, especially in hypoxic conditions. Self-arrest techniques that function on snow are ineffective on ice at this angle. Crampons attached to snowboard boots introduce additional instability rather than control. In his personal time, Koren snowboarded steep alpine lines in the Tatras and the Alps. He treated the activity as technical practice rather than recreation. He analyzed footage privately to improve efficiency and balance. He had modified a short freeride snowboard with removable crampon adapters, welding mounts to accommodate climbing equipment. The setup had been tested at lower elevations, on softer snow, without incident. It had never been tested above 20,000 feet or on refrozen glacial ice. His plan was limited in scope. He did not intend to summit. He planned to ascend to just below the balcony, approximately 27,500 feet, then descend partway by snowboard to reduce time in the death zone. He viewed this as a risk reduction measure rather than an innovation. Faster descent meant less oxygen consumption and shorter exposure. The logic aligned with his professional habits. The Lhotse face formed the physical setting for that reasoning. It is a massive wall of glacial ice descending from the South Col toward Camp 3, tilted between 35 and 45 degrees, depending on location. The surface is not forgiving of snow. It is refrozen ice, compressed and polished by wind cycles and solar exposure. In many sections, crampon points struggle to penetrate. Friction is limited. Momentum builds quickly. Above 26,000 feet, every movement occurs in oxygen-deprived conditions, where reaction time and muscle coordination are compromised. The environmental conditions that morning were stable by Everest standards. Winds were moderate. Visibility was clear. Temperatures hovered near minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. None of these factors signaled immediate danger. They formed the background conditions under which routine summit traffic moved, both upward and downward, along the same fixed lines. The environment did not appear hostile. It appeared operational. Several constraints were already in place. Forecasts warned of increasing winds later in the day. Traffic density along the South Col route meant delays were likely. Oxygen supplies were finite. Each pause on the Lhotse face increased consumption while offering no opportunity for rest. These were not emergency signals. They were standard limitations that climbers accepted as part of the ascent cycle. Equipment considerations added further complexity. Supplemental oxygen systems restricted torso movement and added weight. Cold stiffened joints and reduced tactile feedback through gloves and boots. Crampons were designed for climbing, not sliding. Fixed lines provided the only reliable arrest mechanism on slopes that offered no natural stopping points. None of these factors was hidden. All were acknowledged in briefings and training. They were understood as manageable, provided established protocols were followed. The primary protocol governing the Lhotse face is continuous attachment to fixed lines. The system assumes that climbers remain clipped at all times while ascending or descending. Rescue planning, traffic flow, and safety margins are all built around that assumption. There is no secondary system positioned to intervene if a climber disconnects. No independent arrest mechanism exists below. Once detached, the individual operates outside the structure that allows the route to function safely. This limitation is rarely emphasized because it is rarely violated. The system works because compliance is nearly universal. When compliance breaks, the environment reasserts itself immediately. Ice, gravity, and slope angle replace procedure. There is no buffer period during which mistakes can be corrected. Alternative descent methods have been proposed on Everest for decades. They are routinely rejected by guides and expedition leaders, not as a matter of tradition, but because accumulated incident data shows that deviation eliminates the final margin of safety. On the Lhotse face, controlled descent requires constant surface feedback. Hard ice disrupts that feedback. Altitude delays reaction. Added equipment restricts movement. These variables do not fail gradually. They fail simultaneously. Corin reached Camp 4 on May 17th after a strenuous rotation. He reported mild headache and shortness of breath, common symptoms at altitude. His oxygen saturation levels were within acceptable ranges. He rested, hydrated, and repeatedly checked his equipment. Nothing indicated imminent failure. The system appeared intact. During the evening briefing, the lead guide reviewed weather forecasts and emphasized standard descent protocols. No alternative methods were discussed. Corin did not raise his plan during the briefing. There was no formal approval or prohibition. The system assumed compliance and moved forward. On the morning of May 18th, Corin departed Camp 4 at approximately 5:20 a.m., ascending steadily along the fixed lines. Conditions remained stable. Traffic was moderate. By 9 a.m., he reached a point just below the balcony, around 27,400 feet. He radioed Camp 4, reporting his position and confirming his intention to begin descent. The distinction between controlled descent and uncontrolled fall was central but understated. Controlled descent requires immediate and continuous feedback between the surface and the body. On Everest, that feedback degrades rapidly with altitude. Reaction times slow. Balance adjustments lag. Equipment interferes with movement. The margin between control and loss narrows to seconds. Before stepping off the line, Corin took several moments to prepare. He adjusted his gloves to improve grip, checked the routing of his oxygen hose to ensure it would not snag, and tested his footing with short, deliberate shifts of weight. The movements were familiar, almost routine. Nothing in the environment demanded urgency. The slope below appeared consistent, the surface uniform. To anyone watching, the scene resembled preparation rather than risk. 2 Sherpas and 1 Western climber were nearby on the route. They observed Korin step sideways, off the fixed line onto a relatively flat section of slope. He unclipped his safety tether, removed his pack, and sat down. He retrieved the snowboard, locked his boots into the bindings, and stood carefully, testing balance and edge engagement. They were spaced several meters apart along the line, paused to manage traffic and adjust their own descent systems. None intervened. Nothing about the scene suggested immediate danger. What drew attention later was not panic or warning, but how ordinary the moment appeared just before Korin moved away from the line. The slope at that location measured approximately 35 degrees. The surface was a hard, refrozen snow over glacial ice, smoothed by the wind. Korin adjusted his oxygen mask and shifted his weight onto the heel-side edge. His initial movement appeared controlled. There was no visible hesitation. For a brief moment, the system he had trusted appeared to be functioning. That moment marked the final point at which the outcome remained uncertain. For the first few seconds, Tomasz Korin remained upright. Witnesses later described the snowboard's edge tracing a faint, shallow line across the surface. The board did not sink. It skimmed. The slope offered no compression, no resistance beyond a thin layer of refrozen snow over ice. His weight shifted as he attempted to initiate a turn, a routine adjustment meant to regulate speed and direction. The downhill edge failed to engage. Instead of biting, it slid laterally. Acceleration was immediate and measurable. Korin's speed increased before his body could respond. At that altitude, reaction lag is not dramatic. It is subtle and absolute. The body does not freeze. It simply arrives too late. He attempted to lower himself into a seated position, a standard response intended to increase surface contact and initiate self-arrest. The snowboard altered the mechanics of the movement, acting as a rigid lever beneath his feet, elevated his hips, and prevented full contact between his torso and the slope. His crampons, still attached to his boots, scraped the ice intermittently, catching and releasing in rapid succession. Each contact jolted his legs without reducing speed. The board began to vibrate as it crossed irregularities in the ice. This vibration, known to riders as chatter, indicates loss of edge stability. On softer snow, chatter can be corrected through weight redistribution. On hard ice, it escalates. The board oscillated faster than his muscles could compensate. Balance adjustments lagged behind the surface conditions. Within 5 seconds, the slope steepened past 40 degrees. Korin's center of mass shifted forward. The board rotated beneath him, pivoting downhill. His upper body pitched forward, while his lower body lagged, forcing a headfirst orientation. Witnesses reported that the transition appeared abrupt, not gradual. There was no prolonged struggle for balance. The loss of control occurred in a single sequence. Korin cartwheeled once. His body left the surface briefly, rotating in the air before striking the ice headfirst. The impact occurred at an estimated speed exceeding 40 miles per hour. The sound carried clearly in the thin air. Witnesses described it as sharp and final, distinct from the dull thuds associated with sliding falls. The impact fractured his cervical spine at multiple levels. Post-incident analysis determined that the force exceeded the structural tolerance of the vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. Neurological function ceased within seconds. There was no evidence of prolonged consciousness. Death occurred before secondary injuries could register. The oxygen cylinder mounted on his back ruptured on impact. Pressurized gas vented outward in a brief, visible plume before dissipating. The cylinder itself did not explode, but its mass contributed to rotational momentum. The added weight altered his trajectory, increasing instability as his body continued downslope. The snowboard detached partially during the tumble. One binding tore free from its mount. The board separated from his body and accelerated independently, spinning as it descended. It vanished downslope within seconds, following a different line than the body. Korin's body continued downward, transitioning from sliding to a sequence of uncontrolled impacts. Each collision introduced new injuries. Ribs fractured, internal organs ruptured under blunt force trauma, tissue damage, compounds with each strike. Blood froze on contact with the ice, leaving dark streaks that marked his path briefly before the wind erased them. His limbs moved without coordination. driven solely by momentum. There was no evidence of voluntary movement after the initial impact. The descent was not a single fall. It was a cascade of violent contacts governed entirely by slope angle and gravity. At approximately 26,000 feet, the terrain curved sharply downward into a convex roll. From above, this feature obscures everything below it. Once a body passes over the roll, it disappears completely from view. Witnesses lost sight of Corin at that point. No further impacts were seen. No sounds followed. The entire sequence, from loss of edge to disappearance, lasted less than 45 seconds. Radio communication from witnesses reached Camp 4 at 9:18 a.m. The report was brief and factual. A fall had occurred. The climber was unresponsive. The location was above the convex roll on the upper Lhotse face. No movement had been observed. A Sherpa team prepared to descend, but conditions deteriorated rapidly. Winds increased. Spindrift reduced visibility. The slope below the convex roll was steeper and more exposed than the section above. Descending into that zone would have required unclipping from fixed lines and traversing unprotected ice under worsening conditions. Standard Everest protocol prioritizes preventing additional casualties. Rescue attempts are suspended when the risk to rescuers exceeds survivability thresholds. By 11:30 a.m., the decision was made to halt the descent. Nobody was visible from above. No equipment could be safely reached. The search was suspended. Later that afternoon, weather conditions worsened further. Winds exceeded safe limits. Visibility dropped. Any further attempt to descend the Lhotse face was ruled out. The incident transitioned from rescue to potential recovery, contingent on improved conditions and visual confirmation. 3 days later, on May 21st, a climber descending from Camp 3 spotted a snowboard lodged against a serac wall at approximately 25,800 feet. The board was cracked clean through the binding mount. Fiberglass layers were delaminated, indicating high energy impact. One binding remained attached. The other was missing. The board's orientation suggested it had separated early in the fall and followed a different trajectory. The board was photographed and documented. Recovery was deemed too dangerous due to icefall risk and unstable seracs above. The location was logged for future reference. No further equipment was located that season. Corin's body remained out of sight. The slope below the convex roll feeds into a series of crevasse fields and icefall zones. Bodies entering this terrain often become unrecoverable, either buried by subsequent ice movement or carried deeper into glacial systems. The following climbing season, a helmet was discovered in a crevasse below the Lhotse face. A camera remained attached. The footage was recovered and reviewed. It showed 14 seconds of descent before impact. The video confirmed a loss of edge engagement, rapid acceleration, and a head-first collision with the ice. No audio beyond wind noise was present. There were no verbalizations. A coroner's review, based on footage and known injury patterns, concluded that death was instantaneous due to a catastrophic cervical spine fracture and blunt force trauma. Secondary injuries were extensive, but not contributory to the cause of death. There was no indication of prolonged suffering. Thomas Corin's death did not result from a sudden failure or an unforeseeable hazard. It followed a deliberate decision to leave the fixed line system on a section of the Lhotse face, where hard ice, slope angle, and altitude allowed no margin for correction. His background taught him that precision and uninterrupted motion could manage exposure. On that surface, at that altitude, once edge engagement failed, there was nothing left to manage. The outcome was set not by panic or confusion, but by the moment he chose to step away from the only structure capable of stopping him.